am so glad you are here tonight. If you are new, go ahead and subscribe. Drop a comment letting me know what film or show you would like me to explore next, and settle in. Get comfortable. Tonight, we are drifting into the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, but not the adventures you might know from the films. We are going deeper, far deeper, into the ancient mythology that shaped this world. We are talking about gods and curses, about the rules that govern life and death at sea, about the binding of a goddess and the price of immortality. You might know the swashbuckling tales of treasure and adventure, but there is so much more beneath the surface. The Caribbean of these films is not just a place of pirate ships and gold. It is a realm where the supernatural bleeds into the natural, where ancient powers still hold sway, where the line between mortal and immortal is dangerously thin. So take a breath, relax, and let us begin this journey into the deep waters of myth and magic. In the days before recorded history, before the age of sail, before even the great empires rose and fell, the seas were not merely water and salt and tide. They were alive, conscious, willful. The ocean was not an environment to be navigated, but an entity to be respected, feared, and if you were fortunate, loved. This consciousness had a name, Calypso, daughter of the Titan Atlas. She was not simply a goddess who ruled over the waters. She was the waters themselves, every wave and current and storm an expression of her will. To understand the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, you must first understand this fundamental truth. The sea is a character in its own right, perhaps the most important character. It is not a backdrop or a setting. It is a living force with desires and moods, and the power to grant or withhold life at its whim. Calypso embodied the essential nature of the ocean, changing, harsh, untamable, fickle, unpredictable, beautiful, terrible. She could cradle a ship gently through calm waters or tear it apart with winds that came from nowhere. She could guide sailors safely to shore or lead them into reefs that would shatter their hulls. There was no malice in this. The sea simply was what it was, and Calypso was the manifestation of that truth. All sailors everywhere both loved and feared her, because both responses were equally appropriate. To sail was to put yourself at the mercy of a goddess who had no obligation to be merciful. This is crucial to understanding the supernatural landscape of this world. The gods here are not distant, abstract beings sitting in some celestial realm, passing judgment on mortals. They are immanent, present, woven into the fabric of reality itself. Calypso does not merely control the sea. She is the sea. Her moods are the weather. Her anger is the storm. Her favor is the wind that fills your sails. But Calypso, despite her divine nature, carried something unusual in her blood, mortality. She was not purely divine. This mixing of mortal and immortal essence made her different from other gods, if indeed there were others. It made her capable of understanding human experience in a way that purely divine beings cannot. She could comprehend desire, longing, the particular ache of time passing. She could feel what mortals felt, and crucially, she could love. This detail is not trivial. The fact that a goddess contains mortal blood suggests something profound about the cosmology of this world. Perhaps the divine and the mortal are not separate categories but points on a spectrum. Perhaps godhood is not a binary state but a matter of degree. This would explain much about how magic functions in the Caribbean, how curses can bind even divine beings, how the supernatural can be trapped or controlled or negotiated with. The gods here have limitations. They can be hurt. They can be imprisoned. They can make mistakes. The sea under Calypso's rule was a dangerous place, but it was also a place of wonder and magic. Ships could encounter things that defied explanation, islands that appeared only under certain conditions, creatures from the deepest trenches rising to the surface, storms that came from cloudless skies. This was a world where the natural and supernatural were not divided into separate spheres but existed in constant intermingling. A sailor might spend weeks seeing nothing unusual, only to turn a corner and find himself face to face with something impossible. This unpredictability was part of Calypso's nature. You could not chart the magical the way you could chart islands and coastlines. It came and went according to rules that mortals could not fully comprehend. Some sailors adapted to this reality better than others. The most successful were those who learned to read the subtle signs, to sense when the sea was in a generous mood, and when it demanded respect and distance. They developed superstitions and rituals, ways of appeasing the goddess without directly invoking her name. These practices were not mere folklore. They were survival strategies in a world where the environment had consciousness and preference. The concept of a living ocean has profound implications for how we understand this universe. It means that geography is not fixed. The sea can hide things or reveal them according to its will. Isla de Muerta, the island of death, can only be found by those who already know where it is. This is not simply difficult navigation. It is the sea itself, choosing who may find certain places. The island exists in a state of quantum uncertainty, simultaneously there and not there, until observed by someone with the proper knowledge. This suggests that reality in the Caribbean is partially subjective, that consciousness affects the physical world in measurable ways. A map is not just a representation of territory. It is a negotiation with forces that may or may not choose to honor the cartographer's understanding. This is why the Malkun map, which shows the path to the Fountain of Youth, is so valuable. It does not simply provide directions. It contains a kind of permission, a key that convinces the sea to allow passage. Let us consider what it means for the ocean to have a goddess. In most mythologies, gods rule over domains. Zeus rules the sky, Poseidon rules the sea, Hades rules the underworld. They are separate from their domains, exerting control from a position of authority. But Calypso is different. She does not rule the sea from outside it. She is immanent within it, indistinguishable from it. When you sail, you are literally traveling through her body. When you drink seawater, you are tasting her essence. When you drown, you are being absorbed back into her. This creates a radically different relationship between mortals and the divine. You cannot escape Calypso by simply refusing to worship her. If you go to sea, you are in relationship with her whether you acknowledge it or not. She affects you and you affect her. Every ship that cuts through the waves is a kind of violation, a cutting of her flesh. Every anchor dropped is a piercing, and yet she permits this, even facilitates it when she chooses, because she is not simply a victim of human activity. She has agency and makes choices about how to respond. The magic that flows from Calypso is wild magic, untamed and primal. It does not follow the neat rules that human practitioners of magic might prefer. It cannot be fully systematized or made predictable. This is why voodoo practitioners like Tia Dalma, who work with this kind of power, are both respected and feared. They are not controlling magic in the way a scientist controls a chemical reaction. They are negotiating with forces that have their own agendas, making deals and offerings, and hoping for favorable outcomes. The doll magic, the resurrection of the dead, the reading of futures. These are not spells in the sense of reproducible formulas. They are more like prayers or invitations, asking the powers that be to intervene in specific ways. Sometimes the powers agree. Sometimes they demand payment. Sometimes they simply ignore the request. This unpredictability is baked into the fundamental nature of magic in this world, because magic ultimately flows from a goddess who is herself unpredictable. There is also the question of what Calypso wants. Gods in mythology typically have clear desires: power, worship, order, justice, beauty. But what does the sea want? Perhaps nothing coherent in human terms. The ocean simply is, and Calypso is the personification of that existence. She does not want ships to sink or sailors to drown, but neither does she particularly care to prevent these things. She is not cruel, but neither is she kind. She is beyond such categories, operating according to a logic that seems arbitrary from a human perspective, but makes perfect sense from the perspective of a force of nature. Storms happen not because the goddess is angry, but because atmospheric conditions create them, and the goddess is the atmospheric conditions. This makes her terrifying in a way that a malevolent deity would not be. You can negotiate with evil, you can appease anger, but how do you negotiate with the fundamental nature of reality itself? This is the question that sailors in the age of Calypso faced every time they left port. The worship of Calypso, such as it was, took many forms across different cultures. Some saw her as a mother figure, the source of all life since life began in the oceans. Others saw her as a destroyer, a force of chaos that had to be constantly guarded against. Still others understood her in more complex terms, as a goddess who contained multitudes, who could be generous and cruel, nurturing and destructive, often in the same moment. There were no grand temples built to her, because how do you build a temple to the ocean? The temple was the ocean itself. Every shoreline was an altar. Every ship was a floating shrine. Offerings were made by tossing valuables overboard, by pouring wine into the waves, by speaking prayers into the wind, and hoping they reached the goddess's ears. These practices were not organized religion in any formal sense. They were organic responses to living in constant proximity to a conscious divine force. The age when Calypso ruled the seas directly was an age of magic and terror and wonder. It was a time when humanity had not yet fully asserted dominion over the natural world, when the boundaries between possible and impossible were blurred, when sailing was as much an act of faith as an act of skill. Understanding this context is essential to understanding what comes later. The binding of Calypso, the taming of the seas, the slow fade of magic from the world. These are not merely plot points. They represent a fundamental shift in the nature of reality itself, the transition from a world of myth to a world of reason, from divine caprice to natural law. The story of Pirates of the Caribbean is, at its deepest level, the story of that transition and what is lost in the process. In the depths of this mythological age, there existed a sacred duty that bridged the world of the living and the realm beyond death. When a sailor died at sea, their soul faced a terrible fate. Drowning is not like dying on land. On land, your body remains, can be buried, can return to the earth. At sea, you simply sink into the depths, into darkness, into cold that penetrates beyond flesh, into whatever constitutes the essence of a person. These drowned souls needed guidance. They needed someone to collect them, to ferry them from the world they knew to whatever lay beyond. This was not a role that could be filled by just anyone. It required someone willing to exist between worlds, to sail the boundary between life and death, to serve as psychopomp for all the ocean's victims. The role required a special ship, one that could navigate not just physical waters but metaphysical ones as well. The Flying Dutchman was that vessel, and it needed a captain. This is where the story of Davy Jones begins, though not as the monster he would become. In the beginning, Jones was simply a sailor, a mortal man who loved the sea. The exact circumstances of how he came to Calypso's attention are lost to time and myth, but the fact remains that the goddess chose him. Perhaps she saw in him a dedication to the ocean that matched her own nature. Perhaps she recognized a soul capable of bearing the immense responsibility she was about to offer. Or perhaps, and this is the crucial detail, she simply fell in love. Calypso, containing as she did that thread of mortal blood, was capable of love in ways that purely divine beings might not be. She loved Jones, and in that love, she wanted to give him something extraordinary, not a treasure or a kingdom, but a purpose, a role that would make him essential to the functioning of the cosmos itself. The bargain Calypso offered Jones was this: he would become captain of the Flying Dutchman. He would spend 10 years sailing the waters between life and death, collecting the souls of those who perished at sea and ferrying them to their final rest. It was a sacred duty, one that required him to give up his mortal life in exchange for something stranger and more profound. He would become the ferryman, the guide of souls, the one who ensures that death at sea is not the end, but a transition. In exchange for this service, Jones would be granted 1 day of reprieve every 10 years. On that day, he could set foot on land and be with Calypso, if his love for her remained true. If he fulfilled his duty faithfully, then after an unspecified time, he would be released from his obligation and another would take his place. The specifics of this release are vague, perhaps intentionally so. Was there a set number of 10-year cycles, or was it dependent on some other factor? The mythology does not make this clear. What is clear is that Jones accepted. He took up the mantle of captain, took command of the Dutchman, and began his duty. For 10 years, he sailed the liminal waters, collecting souls. Imagine what that decade must have been like. The Dutchman exists partially outside normal reality. It can submerge, traveling beneath the waves into spaces that regular ships cannot reach. It appears when needed, drawn by death like a shark to blood in the water. Jones would approach the drowning or the newly drowned, would offer them passage, would guide them onto his ship. Some might come willingly, grateful for the guidance. Others might resist, not understanding that death had already claimed them. Jones would have to convince them, cajole them, perhaps even force them aboard. Then the ship would sail, not to any physical destination, but into the spaces between, carrying souls to their final judgment or rest, or whatever awaited them beyond the veil. This duty was not meant as punishment. It was an honor, a sacred task that maintained the cosmic order. Without the Dutchman and its captain, souls lost at sea would have no guide. They would be trapped in the water, neither fully alive nor fully dead, existing in a state of confused limbo. This is what Jones prevented. He was, in essence, a servant of mercy, ensuring that death at sea, while tragic, was at least final and complete. The role required enormous emotional resilience. To constantly be surrounded by death, to witness the moment when life transitions to whatever comes after, to never have a break from this work except for one single day every 10 years. This would test anyone. But Jones had his love for Calypso to sustain him. He had the promise that at the end of his service, he would have that one day with her. One day, to set foot on solid ground, to feel earth beneath his feet, instead of the endless rocking of the ship, to hold the goddess he loved in a form he could touch. The nature of the Flying Dutchman itself deserves examination. It is not an ordinary ship. It is a vessel that exists in multiple states simultaneously. Physically, it appears as a massive ship, larger and more imposing than most, with an otherworldly quality to its construction. But it is also something else, a symbol, a threshold, a doorway. When it submerges, it is not simply diving under the water like a primitive submarine. It is transitioning between planes of existence, entering the realm of the dead, while still maintaining a connection to the living world. This is necessary for its function. The souls it collects exist in a state between life and death, and the ship must be able to navigate that state to transport them. Only a captain with a unique nature could command such a vessel. Jones, by accepting the role, transformed himself. He was no longer simply mortal, but neither was he fully immortal in the way gods are. He existed in the same liminal space as his ship, forever at the threshold. The metaphysics of death in this universe are complex. There is clearly an afterlife, or perhaps multiple afterlives. Souls do not simply cease to exist when the body dies. They continue in some form and must go somewhere. The Dutchman's role is to facilitate that transition specifically for those who die at sea. This suggests that different modes of death might lead to different destinations or require different guides. Someone who dies on land might have a different path than someone who drowns. The ocean, being under Calypso's dominion, requires its own psychopomp, its own system for managing death. This is why Jones's role is so crucial. Without him, the system breaks down. And indeed, when Jones eventually abandons his duty, the consequences are severe. Souls become trapped. The Flying Dutchman, without its proper captain, becomes something twisted. The cosmic order frays. The relationship between Jones and Calypso was, by its very nature, doomed to tragedy. Consider the fundamental incompatibility. Jones was mortal, or at least had been mortal before taking up his duty. He understood time in linear terms, in sequences of moments leading from past to future. He could anticipate, plan, hope for specific outcomes. Calypso, being the sea itself, existed in a completely different temporal relationship. The ocean does not plan, it does not keep appointments. Tides come and go according to gravitational forces and the rotation of the planet, not according to promises made. Storms develop when atmospheric conditions align, not when it would be convenient. To ask Calypso to be somewhere at a specific time is to ask the ocean to stop being the ocean, to constrain itself according to human concepts of obligation and scheduling. This is not something she could do, even if she wanted to. When Jones completed his first 10-year cycle of service and came ashore for his promised day with Calypso, he was met with absence. She was not there. The mythology does not specify whether this was the first time they were supposed to meet, or whether there had been successful meetings before. But at some point, Jones came ashore and found no one waiting. He waited. He searched. He called out. But the sea does not answer when called. It moves according to its own rhythms. Calypso's absence was not malicious. It was not deliberate betrayal in the human sense. She simply was not there because the nature of the sea is to be everywhere and nowhere, constant and inconstant, present and absent simultaneously. To Jones, waiting on the shore, with his heart full of longing and his decade of faithful service behind him, this philosophical distinction meant nothing. He experienced it as betrayal, as abandonment, as proof that his love was not returned. This is the central tragedy. Neither party was wrong. Jones fulfilled his duty. He kept his word. He showed up when he said he would. And Calypso loved him, in her way, according to her nature. But her nature and his expectations were fundamentally misaligned. This kind of tragedy is perhaps the most painful, because there is no villain, no clear point of failure, just two beings trying to love each other across an unbridgeable gap of different ways of existing. The question that haunts this story is whether such love was ever possible. Could a mortal, even one transformed by divine duty, truly love a goddess who is also the ocean? Could that goddess, containing mortal blood, but still fundamentally divine and elemental, truly love in the way a human understands love? Perhaps the answer is no, and the tragedy was written into the structure of their relationship from the beginning. Jones's response to this perceived betrayal set in motion everything that followed. Heartbreak turned to bitterness, bitterness turned to rage, and rage sought an outlet, a way to hurt the one who had hurt him. But how do you hurt a goddess? How do you punish the ocean itself? Jones could not attack Calypso directly. He could not strike at her the way one person might strike at another, but he could take from her what she valued. He could strip her of her dominion over the seas. He could bind her, trap her, reduce her from goddess to mortal woman. To do this, he would need help, and he would need knowledge that no mortal should possess. Jones had access to the Journal of the Ancient Seas, a text that contained secrets of primordial magic, instructions for working forces that should have remained hidden. Whether he found this journal during his decade of service, or whether it came into his possession some other way, it gave him what he needed, the knowledge of how to bind a goddess. And so Jones betrayed his betrayer. He approached the brethren, the great captains and pirates who sailed the seas, and he offered them a bargain. He would teach them how to imprison Calypso, how to remove her influence from the waters, how to make the seas safe and predictable and theirs to rule. In exchange, he would have his revenge. The goddess, who had abandoned him, would lose everything, just as he felt he had lost everything. This is how wounded love curdles into hatred. This is how the guardian becomes the betrayer. Jones, whose sacred duty was to serve the sea, and by extension serve Calypso, chose revenge over service, bitterness over love, and in doing so, set in motion the diminishment of magic itself. The mechanics of binding a goddess reveal much about how magic operates in this world. Divine beings, despite their power, are not omnipotent or invulnerable. They can be affected by ritual, by symbols, by the combined will of mortals working in concert. The specific method Jones revealed to the brethren required 9 powerful individuals, each representing a different domain of the sea, to come together with objects of personal power. These would later be called the 9 pieces of 8, though they were not currency in any traditional sense. When the first Brethren court gathered, the captains were impoverished, having no common currency to use, so they improvised, each offering something personal, something meaningful, a piece of junk transformed into a piece of power through intention and ritual. This detail is important. Magic in this world does not require expensive components or rare materials. It requires meaning, intention, and personal investment. The 9 pirate lords who formed this first court were not heroes. They were opportunists who saw a chance to claim power and took it. Each controlled a different region of the world's oceans: the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Adriatic Sea, the Caspian Sea, the South China Sea, the Black Sea. These were not arbitrary divisions. They represented genuine spheres of influence, areas where each lord held sway through a combination of force, reputation, and strategic control of trade routes. But their power was always limited by the unpredictability of the sea itself. Storms could destroy their fleets. Calypso's whims could strand them in doldrums or drive them into reefs. They had physical power but no true control. The binding would change that. With Calypso imprisoned, unable to exercise her divine authority, the seas would become just water. Dangerous still, but predictable, subject to natural laws rather than divine caprice. The ritual itself must have been extraordinary. 9 captains standing in a circle, each holding their piece of 8, speaking words taught to them by a betrayed lover turned traitor. The words would have been in an ancient language, perhaps one that predated human speech entirely, drawn from the journal of the ancient seas. As they spoke, as they focused their collective will on the purpose of binding, reality would have begun to shift. Calypso, wherever she was in that moment, however dispersed her consciousness was across the vastness of the ocean, would have felt herself being pulled, compressed, constrained, the infinite forced into the finite, the eternal made temporary. Her divine essence, vast as the sea itself, was gathered and forced into the fragile shell of a mortal woman's body. The agony of this transformation is unimaginable. To be everything and then suddenly be a single point, to be the ocean and then be trapped in flesh that could bruise and bleed and break. The woman who emerged from this binding was called Tia Dalma. She retained memories, retained power, but both were diminished. Filtered through the limitations of mortal form, she could work magic, practice voodoo, read fates, and resurrect the dead. But she could not command the seas themselves. She was trapped, and she did not know who had betrayed her. The brethren had been careful. They let her believe that they alone were responsible, that they had discovered the ritual themselves. Jones's role remained hidden. This was perhaps his final act of cowardice, or perhaps a last gesture of the love that had once existed between them. He could not face her, knowing what he had done, and so Calypso lived in ignorance of the full truth, imprisoned in mortal form, aware that the brethren had bound her, but not aware that her lover had shown them how. With Calypso bound, the seas changed fundamentally. The shift was not immediate, but gradual. Storms became more predictable, following patterns of weather rather than divine mood. Currents flowed according to temperature and planetary rotation rather than the whims of a goddess. Navigation became more reliable. Maps became more accurate. The age of reason could begin to dawn, because the chaos at the heart of the world had been constrained, but magic itself began to fade. With the goddess imprisoned, the source of supernatural power weakened. Enchantments that had worked for centuries became less reliable. Creatures of myth retreated into deeper waters or vanished entirely. The world became more mundane. The brethren achieved their goal. They tamed the seas. They divided the waters among themselves and established territories. They could sail with greater confidence, knowing that their success or failure depended on skill and luck rather than divine favor or curse. But they also created the conditions for their own eventual downfall. With magic fading and the seas becoming predictable, organized civilization could expand. Nations could maintain larger fleets. Trade routes could be established and protected. The East India Trading Company and other massive commercial enterprises could emerge, treating the ocean as just another resource to be exploited, rather than a divine force to be respected. The same taming that empowered the pirates also empowered their enemies. By binding Calypso, the brethren inadvertently accelerated the end of the age of piracy, creating the conditions that would eventually threaten their entire way of life. This is the irony at the heart of the binding. In seeking freedom from divine control, they made themselves vulnerable to human control instead. The curse on the Aztec gold represents a very specific type of supernatural justice, one that operates on principles of intent, action, and restitution. To understand this curse is to understand how magic functions as a system in the Caribbean. The origin of the curse lies in broken promises and blood money. During the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, the Aztecs offered Hernan Cortés 882 pieces of gold with one condition attached: stop the slaughter, spare our people, take the gold and leave. This was not simply a transaction but a sacred bargain, witnessed by the gods the Aztecs served. These were gods different from Calypso, referred to in the mythology as the heathen gods, suggesting a pantheon of entities governing different aspects of reality. When Cortés accepted the gold but continued his conquest anyway, he violated the terms of a divinely witnessed contract. This violation demanded consequences. The Aztec priests, with their dying breaths, called upon their gods to curse the gold. The curse they created was precise in its operation and reveals several fundamental rules about how magic works in this world. First, the curse only affects those who personally commit the act of theft. Specifically, anyone who removes gold from the stone chest in which it was placed becomes subject to the curse. This is crucial. Possession of the gold does not trigger the curse. Being given the gold by someone else does not trigger it. Only the deliberate act of taking it from the chest, with intention to steal, activates the punishment. This tells us that magic in this universe can distinguish between different types of action. It judges not just the physical act, but the intent behind it. Second, the curse makes no distinction based on knowledge. You do not have to know about the curse for it to affect you. Ignorance is not protection. The moment your hand closes around a piece of gold and lifts it from the chest, you are bound, whether you believe in curses or not. The specific nature of the punishment is telling. Those cursed by the Aztec gold become undead, trapped between life and death in a state that is arguably worse than either. They gain immortality but lose all sensation. Food turns to ash in their mouths. Drink provides no refreshment. Physical pleasure becomes impossible. They cannot feel the warmth of the sun, the coolness of the breeze, the touch of another person. They exist in a state of permanent deprivation, forever hungry but unable to eat, forever thirsty but unable to drink, forever desiring but unable to satisfy any desire. In moonlight, their true nature is revealed. The flesh vanishes from their bones, leaving animated skeletons, a visual representation of the emptiness within. This is not simply immortality. It is immortality stripped of everything that makes life worth living. The curse punishes greed by making it impossible to enjoy the fruits of that greed. You can have all the treasure in the world, but you cannot buy anything that brings satisfaction. The cure for the curse is as precisely defined as the curse itself. All 882 pieces of gold must be returned to the chest. Not approximately all, not most, every single piece. And each person who took gold must repay a blood debt. A drop of their blood must touch their specific coin before it is returned. If the thief is dead, the blood of their direct descendant can substitute. This requirement of blood is significant. It suggests that the curse is not merely a magical effect, but a debt that must be paid. Blood represents life force, essence, the thing most personal to an individual. By giving blood, the thief acknowledges their crime and makes restitution not just of the gold, but of something of themselves. The curse operates on principles of justice and balance. Take something you have no right to take, and you lose something precious in return. Make proper restitution, including a sacrifice of your own essence, and the balance is restored. This system of cursed objects reveals a broader principle at work in the magic of the Caribbean. Objects can carry consequences. They can be bound with spells that activate under specific conditions. The gold itself is not evil or magical in its intrinsic nature. It is gold, metal, formed in the hearts of dying stars billions of years ago. But it has been made into a trap through ritual and divine power. Each coin is simultaneously treasure and curse, valuable and dangerous. This duality makes it particularly insidious. The curse exploits human greed, using the desire for wealth as the trigger for punishment. Anyone tempted by gold, anyone who sees the treasure and wants it, is vulnerable. The curse does not need to hunt its victims. The victims come to it, drawn by their own desires. There is also a philosophical dimension to the Aztec curse worth considering. It represents a particular view of justice, one based on personal responsibility and the idea that actions have consequences that cannot be escaped through ignorance or distance. The curse does not care that Cortez is long dead by the time others find the gold. It does not care that those who take the coins may be hundreds of years and thousands of miles removed from the original crime. The curse persists because the gold itself was made into an instrument of justice, and that justice is patient, eternal, waiting for thieves to reveal themselves. This raises interesting questions about the nature of inheritance and guilt. If you are descended from someone who committed a crime, are you responsible for making restitution? According to the logic of the curse, yes. Your blood can lift the curse because your blood is connected to the blood of the thief. You inherit not just genetic material, but also debts, obligations, karmic weight. The existence of such precisely defined magical effects suggests that curse creation is a sophisticated art with rules and limitations. You cannot simply wave your hand and curse something. You need power, knowledge, and usually the backing of divine or supernatural forces. The Aztec priests who created this curse were dying, which may have given their words extra weight. The urgency and finality of death can amplify magic, pouring the entirety of a life's remaining force into a single working. They also called upon their gods, plural, suggesting that the curse draws power from multiple divine sources. This may be what gives it such enduring strength. A curse backed by one god might fade over time or be counterspelled. A curse backed by multiple deities, woven into the structure of reality itself, becomes nearly unbreakable. The Aztec curse also demonstrates that magic in this world can affect anyone, regardless of their belief or cultural background. The pirates who eventually find the treasure are not Aztec. They do not worship the heathen gods who empowered the curse. Many of them likely do not even believe in magic before they become cursed. But the curse does not require their belief to function. This is different from some magical systems where faith or participation is necessary. Here, magic is objective. It exists independent of human acceptance or understanding. This makes the supernatural in the Caribbean genuinely dangerous rather than merely colorful folklore. You cannot protect yourself through skepticism. The curse will find you regardless. The question of why the Aztec priests chose this specific form of curse is worth pondering. They could have simply made the gold kill anyone who touched it. That would have been simpler and perhaps more effective as a deterrent. Instead, they created something more subtle and more cruel. The cursed are not killed. They are trapped in a parody of life, given immortality but stripped of everything that makes existence meaningful. This suggests that the curse is not merely about punishment, but about teaching a lesson. Greed seeks to acquire and possess. The curse gives the greedy exactly what they want: eternal life and unending possession of treasure. but reveals those things to be hollow without the ability to enjoy them. It is a philosophical statement as much as a magical effect. The things you think you want most may not bring satisfaction, even if you achieve them. There is also the matter of how the curse interacts with other supernatural forces in the world. Does being cursed by Aztec gold affect your soul's journey after death? If you die while cursed, what happens? The mythology does not provide clear answers, but we can speculate. The curse traps you between life and death, suggesting that your soul is also trapped, unable to move on to whatever afterlife awaits. This would make the curse even more terrible. Not only do you suffer in the present, but you risk eternal limbo if you cannot lift the curse before something destroys your physical form. Given that Davy Jones's duty is to ferry souls lost at sea to their final rest, there may be interaction between these two systems. Perhaps Jones can claim cursed souls, or perhaps the curse puts you beyond even his reach, trapped in the mortal realm regardless of death. The Fountain of Youth represents yet another form of immortality, distinct from both the Aztec curse and Davy Jones's transformation. While the curse gives immortality as punishment, and Jones's duty gives immortality as burden, the fountain promises immortality as blessing. But like all forms of eternal life in this universe, it comes with a catch. The fountain does not simply grant immortality to anyone who drinks from it. It requires a ritual, the profane ritual as it is called, and that ritual demands both a seeker and a victim. 2 silver chalices, the chalices of Cartagena, must be used. One chalice receives water from the fountain and a mermaid's tear. The other receives only water. The person who drinks from the chalice with the tear steals the remaining years of life from the person who drinks from the chalice without. It is not creation of life, but transference of it, a zero-sum exchange, where one gains what another loses. This mechanic reveals a fundamental principle about immortality in the Caribbean. It cannot be created from nothing. The universe maintains a balance. If someone is to live beyond their natural span, that life must come from somewhere. The fountain facilitates the transfer, but it does not generate life force ex nihilo. This is why it is called the profane ritual. It is profane not because it involves dark gods or demons, but because it violates the natural order by stealing life that belongs to another. The ritual requires a mermaid's tear, which is extraordinarily difficult to obtain. Mermaids are dangerous creatures, not the friendly beings of children's stories. They lure sailors to their deaths. Capturing one and making it cry requires either great cruelty or extraordinary circumstance. The tear itself may serve as a catalyst, containing the concentrated sorrow of a being that exists between human and fish, between air and water, making it suitable for a ritual that exists between life and death. The fountain's location is hidden and can only be found by those who possess the Maukun map or equivalent knowledge. Like Isla de Muerta, the fountain exists in a state of quantum uncertainty, revealed only to those who already know where it is or possess the right keys. This suggests that the fountain is partially outside normal geography, tucked into a fold of reality that most people cannot access. The map itself is more than navigation. It is permission, a kind of ticket that allows passage through barriers that keep the fountain hidden from casual discovery. On this map, the struggle for immortality is depicted symbolically as a tug-of-war between a skeleton and an angel. The skeleton represents death, the thing you are trying to escape. The angel represents eternal life, the thing you seek. They pull in opposite directions, eternally balanced, suggesting that the quest for immortality is a struggle that never fully resolves. The mythology surrounding Juan Ponce de Leon and his search for the fountain adds historical weight to the legend. Ponce de Leon was a real conquistador who explored Florida and the Caribbean in the early 1500s. Legends claim he searched for the Fountain of Youth, though historians debate whether this was truly his goal or a later embellishment. In the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, he found it. He discovered the location, learned the ritual, perhaps even used it. But he eventually died anyway, suggesting that the fountain's immortality is not absolute or that he chose to give it up. This pattern repeats throughout the mythology. Those who seek the fountain either fail to find it but cannot complete the ritual but cannot live with what they have done, or achieve immortality, and then discover it is not what they wanted. The fountain also tests those who seek it. This detail is mentioned almost in passing, but is crucial. The fountain has agency, or is connected to some force that judges seekers. It does not grant immortality indiscriminately. The nature of the test is not specified, but we can imagine it evaluates worthiness, intent, or character. Perhaps it presents moral dilemmas. Perhaps it shows seekers visions of what immortality would actually entail. Perhaps it simply reflects back the truth of what they are, and many cannot bear to see themselves clearly. The fact that a natural feature or magical artifact can test and judge humans suggests again that reality in this universe is partially conscious, that the world itself has opinions about how it should be used. Another form of immortality exists in the bargain Davy Jones offers. Join his crew for 100 years and avoid death. This is not true immortality, but rather a postponement. You will still die eventually, just not yet. The appeal is obvious for someone facing immediate death. Drowning sailors, given the choice between dying now or dying in a century, would often choose the latter, but Jones's bargain is a devil's deal. Those who accept undergo a transformation. They gradually merge with sea life, becoming hybrid creatures, part human and part marine animal. Their individuality is slowly eroded. They become extensions of the ship itself, unable to leave, unable to die, unable to do anything but serve. This is immortality as prison sentence. Years added to your life, but those years filled with suffering and loss of self. The transformation into fish-human hybrids is not arbitrary. It reflects the inner corruption of those who make the bargain. You are trying to escape death, trying to cheat the natural order. In response, you lose your humanity bit by bit. The sea claims you, absorbs you, makes you part of itself in a literal physical way. This is body horror with metaphysical implications. Your appearance reflects your spiritual state. As you become more corrupt, more lost, more removed from human connection and values, your body manifests that corruption visibly. By the end of 100 years, assuming you survive that long, would you even remember who you were? Would any trace of your original self remain? The transformation suggests not. You would be a monster, a thing of the deep, no longer recognizably the person who once made a desperate bargain to avoid drowning. These various forms of immortality, the Aztec curse, the fountain of youth, Jones's bargain, all share a common theme. Immortality is never a pure gift. It always costs something. Your ability to feel someone else's life, your humanity, your freedom. This consistency across different magical systems suggests a fundamental law governing the Caribbean. The universe will not allow you to escape death without payment. You can postpone it, transform it, transfer it, but you cannot simply negate it. Death is woven into the fabric of reality, and immortality is not exemption from that reality, but rather a renegotiation of your relationship to it. This makes the quest for eternal life inherently tragic. Those who seek it most desperately are usually trying to escape fear, loss, or grief. But immortality does not heal those wounds. It preserves them, makes them eternal, ensures you will carry your pain forever. The Pirate Code, written by Morgan and Bartholomew and recorded in the Pirata Codex, represents an attempt to create law without authority, order without hierarchy, freedom without chaos. It is one of the most fascinating elements of the world building because it reveals the political philosophy underlying pirate society. Pirates are defined by their rejection of conventional authority. They do not recognize the right of kings to rule or nations to enforce laws. They operate outside the normal structures of civilization. But humans, even pirates, need some structure to function collectively. The code is that structure, a set of agreements that pirates choose to follow not because anyone can force them, but because following the code is in their mutual self-interest. The code establishes several key principles. Parley, the right to negotiate rather than fight. Captains may call for parley, and this call must be honored by the opposing side. This prevents unnecessary bloodshed and allows for resolution of conflicts through negotiation rather than violence. The rule of parley is sacred because it creates a space for communication even between enemies. Without it, every encounter would devolve into combat, making piracy far more dangerous and less profitable. There are rules about treatment of prisoners, division of plunder, the election of captains, the rights and responsibilities of crew members. Each rule serves a practical purpose, addressing common sources of conflict and providing mechanisms for resolution. The code is explicitly described as more guidelines than actual rules, and this flexibility is crucial to its function. If the code were rigid law, pirates would reject it as just another form of tyranny. But as guidelines, the code provides framework while allowing individual judgment. You can deviate from the code if circumstances warrant, but you must be prepared to justify your deviation to your peers. This creates a kind of case law system where precedent matters but is not absolute. The keeper of the code serves as interpreter and arbiter, but even the keeper cannot simply dictate meaning. The code must be read and applied in context, with understanding of pirate values and the specific situation at hand. The philosophy embedded in the code is essentially libertarian, with communal elements. It emphasizes individual freedom and the right to self-determination. No one can force you to join a crew or follow a captain. All such relationships are voluntary, but once you make agreements, you are bound by them. If you join a crew, you accept the authority of the captain and the obligations of the code. If you violate those obligations, you face consequences determined by the community. This is justice through consensus, rather than imposed authority. The crew decides what is fair, what is deserved, what maintains order. This system only works because pirates, despite their lawlessness, have shared values and interests. They all want successful raids, fair division of loot, reliable crewmates. The code formalizes these wants into expectations and procedures. The Brethren Court extends this principle to the highest level. The 9 pirate lords are essentially regional governors, each responsible for maintaining the code within their territory. They meet to address threats that affect all pirates, to make decisions too large for individual captains. The election of a pirate king demonstrates the democratic element within pirate society. The king is not a monarch with hereditary authority, but an elected leader chosen to address a specific crisis. Historically, such elections almost never succeed because pirates cannot agree on anything. This paralysis is both the strength and weakness of pirate governance. It prevents any one person from gaining tyrannical power, but it also prevents effective collective action, except in the most dire circumstances. The code represents a middle way between the absolute freedom of pure anarchy and the rigid control of civilization. It acknowledges that humans need structure but rejects the idea that structure must be imposed from above by authority figures who claim special rights. Instead, the code emerges from the community, represents consensus, and persists because it serves the interests of those who follow it. This makes it deeply subversive to conventional power structures. It demonstrates that law can exist without kings, that order can emerge without central authority, that people can govern themselves through mutual agreement rather than coercion. The very existence of the code is a challenge to empires and monarchies, proof that their claims to necessary authority are false. However, the code also has limitations. It only applies to those who choose to follow it. There is no mechanism for enforcing the code on those who reject it entirely. Rogue pirates who refuse to acknowledge the Brethren Court or follow code provisions cannot be compelled except through force, which returns the situation to pure violence. The code also struggles with larger existential threats. When facing the East India Trading Company's fleet, individual pirate ships, operating under the code's principles of freedom and self-determination, cannot match the coordinated strategy and overwhelming numbers of a unified military force. This is the fundamental weakness of decentralized organization. It maximizes individual liberty but makes collective defense difficult. The clash between pirate society and the East India Trading Company represents more than a conflict between criminals and law enforcement. It is a collision between two entirely different worldviews, two ways of organizing reality. The company represents the emerging modern world, a world of contracts and corporations, of rationalized commerce and legal frameworks, of progress measured in profit margins and expansion of markets. It is order, predictability, control. Pirates represent the old world, a world of personal honor and face-to-face relationships, of adventure and risk, of freedom measured in the ability to go where you want and take what you need. It is chaos, unpredictability, liberty. These two systems cannot coexist indefinitely. One must dominate. The company's advantage is systematic organization. It has access to the resources of empires, can field massive fleets, operates according to long-term strategies. It does not depend on individual charisma or the outcomes of single battles. If one fleet is destroyed, another can be built. If one governor fails, another can be appointed. The company is anti-fragile, growing stronger through adversity because it learns, adapts, systematizes. Pirates, by contrast, are fragile in aggregate even as they are resilient individually. A single pirate can survive incredible hardships, adapt to any situation, thrive in chaos. But pirates as a collective are only as strong as their ability to cooperate, and that ability is limited by their nature. They are individualists who chose piracy precisely because they do not want to be part of large organizations. The company's stated goal is to eradicate piracy entirely, to make the seas safe for commerce. Safe here means predictable, controllable, subject to company regulation. Every ship would sail on routes approved by the company. Every cargo would pay tariffs. Every port would recognize company authority. The ocean would become just another territory to be administered, mapped, taxed, regulated. There would be no place for pirates in this world because there would be no ungoverned spaces left. This is the nightmare scenario for pirate society. The end not just of individual pirates but of piracy as a way of life. It is extinction, the elimination of a culture and philosophy. Lord Cutler Beckett embodies this vision perfectly. He is not a warrior or adventurer. He is an administrator, a man of ledgers and contracts. He does not want glory or treasure for himself. He wants order. He wants a world that makes sense, where rules are clear and followed, where risk can be calculated and managed. To him, pirates are not romantic rebels but obstacles to progress, inefficiencies in the system that must be eliminated. His possession of Davy Jones's heart is symbolic. He has taken something wild and supernatural, the cursed immortal captain of a ghost ship, and subordinated it to rational economic control. The Flying Dutchman sails not according to Jones's will, but according to company orders. Even death itself has been harnessed to serve corporate interests. This is where magic becomes political. As long as the supernatural existed, as long as goddesses ruled the sea and curses had power, there were limits to what rational systems could control. Mystery persisted, wonder remained. There were spaces in the world that could not be mapped or predicted or exploited. The binding of Calypso was the first step in removing these limits. With the goddess imprisoned, magic began to fade. The seas became navigable, trade routes became reliable. The world shrank, and as magic faded, the space for piracy contracted. Pirates depend on the unmapped and unpredictable. They thrive in chaos. In an ordered world, they have nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, no way to disappear into legend and return unexpectedly. The tragedy is that pirates themselves contributed to this outcome. By binding Calypso, by removing the goddess's chaotic influence, they made the world safer for themselves in the short term, but destroyed the conditions necessary for piracy in the long term. This is a common pattern in history. A group fights against oppressive authority, achieves victory, establishes new systems to prevent the return of tyranny, And those very systems eventually become oppressive in new ways. The brethren thought they were liberating the seas. They were actually beginning a process that would end with corporate dominance and the extinction of their way of life. The question the mythology poses is whether this outcome was inevitable or whether different choices at key moments could have led elsewhere. There is also a thematic dimension to the conflict between piracy and civilization. Pirates represent the human desire for freedom, for self-determination, for adventure and risk. They embody the refusal to accept limits imposed by others. Civilization represents the equally human desire for security, for stability, for protection from chaos and violence. It embodies the acceptance of limits in exchange for safety. Both are legitimate human needs. The tragedy is that they seem incompatible. You cannot have complete freedom and complete security simultaneously. You must choose or find some compromise that satisfies neither desire fully. The Pirates of the Caribbean mythology explores this tension without resolving it, presenting both sides with sympathy while acknowledging the costs of each. The fading of magic in the world is presented as melancholy rather than triumphant. Yes, the seas are safer. Yes, more people survive their voyages. Yes, commerce flourishes and civilization expands. But something has been lost. Wonder, mystery, the sense that the world contains forces beyond human understanding or control. The films take place at the twilight of the age of piracy and the twilight of the age of magic simultaneously, suggesting these are connected phenomena. As rational order expands, as the world becomes mapped and known and administered, the magical retreats. This is not presented as good or bad, but simply as the nature of change. The old world is dying. A new world is being born. Some will thrive in the new world. Others will not survive the transition. Thank you for drifting with me through the deep lore of Pirates of the Caribbean. We have explored the mythology of Calypso and Davy Jones, examined the mechanics of curses and immortality, discussed the philosophy of the pirate code, and witnessed the conflict between freedom and order that defines this world. These films offer far more than adventure and spectacle. They present a fully realized universe with its own rules, its own history, its own metaphysics. The Caribbean they portray as a place where gods walk, where curses bind, where the supernatural struggles against the rational, and where the human desire for freedom collides with the human need for security. It is a world where immortality is always a curse, where magic fades as civilization advances, and where the ocean itself once had a name and a will. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the endless horizon and the freedom of the open sea.